probably within the last few days, but he is home now and doing better, but certainly would appreciate prayers on his behalf. Turn to Luke chapter 15 is where we'll be studying this morning. If you would, turn there. Friday afternoon, I believe it was, I got to visit for a good little while with Sister Becky and got to know her, and just a very, very delightful person, and just really, really enjoyed getting to talk to her. And one of the things that I was, thinking about that kind of goes with this, that she has mentioned several times, and even mentioned yesterday, kind of at the outset. I listened to it a little bit when I uploaded it to YouTube, Miss Becky. You can't not listen to her. I mean, just very, very easy to listen to person, and good biblical thoughts as well. But one of the things that Sister Becky mentioned several times is about how thrilled she was and is to be home. And there are a few words in any language, however it's pronounced in whatever language, there are a few words that evoke the emotion and feelings of warmth and love like home. And in The Wizard of Oz, most of us are familiar with The Wizard of Oz, but the magical words for Dorothy as she clicked her heels together were, "No place like home." We are so familiar with that concept, and not everybody has the best home life growing up, but there's still some sense of home. There's still some sense of someone, some place, maybe both, that was our refuge and is our refuge. And that, again, it just evokes such feelings of love and warmth. But here's the thing, spiritually speaking, we should all realize that in the spiritual sense, we should always be at home. Home can be anywhere on this earth. And, sometimes people spend their entire lives within just a very small radius. That's the case for some folks. Some folks travel and live all over. Some of you in this audience may have grown up in a family. Maybe your dad was in the military, and sometimes there's a lot of moving that goes with that. Sometimes there are other jobs and positions that require a lot of moving around. And you have to learn to make home in a lot of different places. But spiritually speaking, we should never be far from home. Even now, of course, we look toward the eternal home, but even now we can be at home spiritually by being in a right relationship with God, first and foremost, but also in a right relationship with our brothers and sisters in Christ. In Luke 15, 11 through 24, we read about a story, a parable, we often call them. And we've talked before, it's a combination, it's one word in the Greek, but it's a combination of two words, meaning literally a casting beside. So Jesus would take some truth and he would cast beside it, alongside it, this illustration, a story. And boy, they really just make the truths that Jesus taught come to life. And this is one that it's kind of interesting to me, because you could talk to people that are atheist, skeptic, don't know a thing about God, and sometimes they'll use this expression. Maybe somebody's coming in, they've been away for a while or something, and I've even heard people that were very wicked people in the sense of like not any interest in God or spiritual things, and make the statement, well, the prodigal son has come home. Not even realizing that's an allusion to Jesus' parable of the prodigal son, as we often call it. But it's a familiar story of a boy who had it all, lost it all. And thankfully, a boy that finally ended up coming home. The only place he knew he could find love and support and the only place he knew he could be what he needed to be and what he potentially was meant to be. Maybe you're here and you're in the far country like this young man will read about. I hope, if so, that you will be influenced by the power of the words of Christ, to know the love God has for you, and that you will come home. You know, at some point, if we reach an age of accountability and an understanding, a level of understanding, at some point we all wander away from the Father's household. We're born pure and innocent. Children don't inherit sin. Sin is of such a nature, as we've talked about in some of our Sunday night lessons, it's of such a nature it cannot be inherited. We're born pure, but at some point we reach that age of accountability or mental level that makes us accountable, and we go astray, and he bids us to come back. And for the person who has gone astray and has not yet entered into that covenant relationship with the Lord, it is a matter of believing that Jesus Christ is the one who can save you, save me, save you. No one else. It's only through Jesus, as he says in John 14:6. It's a matter of, based upon that belief, being so convicted that I change my mind and it leads to a change of life. We often talk about repentance. That's what repentance is. It's a surrendering of my will to his. I confess him as Lord. I'm not ashamed to stand up before others and say, I believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. In other words, I believe he's my one hope. And then I'm baptized into Christ. It's for the forgiveness of sins, as Peter told the crowd on Pentecost, Acts 2:38. It's to wash away my sins, Acts 22:16. It is to be baptized into Christ, Romans 6:3-4. Baptized into his death, same passage. And it is a situation where when I'm raised up, I'm raised up to walk in newness of life. Again, Romans 6:3-4. But sometimes even after we've entered into that covenant relationship with God, we just sort of pack up our things like this young man and head off to the far country, right? Again, if that's the case with you, you should understand the Father, he wants us to come home. And for the one who is in that covenant relationship with God, as a child of God, it's a matter of, again, changing my mind, deciding I don't want to live for self any longer. I pray to God, ask his forgiveness, and then I obey him faithfully. But in this parable, we read about a boy and his father, but more importantly, we read it's a picture of God and his children. And I'll tell you something, I heard people say this for years when I was younger, and it's not that it didn't impact me then, but it just hits a little different, as we say, when you have children of your own. But especially if you have children, you could have 10 children, 9 of whom are faithful, good, productive servants of the Lord. But the one that occupies your thoughts, your mind, your prayers, is the child who's astray. It's not that you love the other ones less. It's inescapable. And you think about that, and you pray, and you worry, maybe you cry. The light stays on, as we say, hoping, praying, waiting for them to come home. And it hurts every time you think about it. But you hold out hope. One day, maybe that child's going to come home. As we study this parable, I want us to look at 4 pictures. And if you have your hand out there, you'll see those. Number 1, you see a picture of rebellion. I almost forgot I had a PowerPoint, y'all. You see a picture of rebellion. Look at verse 12. Really picking up in 11. And Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. And he divided unto them his living. So this first picture that we see is a picture of rebellion. Here's a boy that he's got it made, we could say. This is a rich home, probably a godly home. He's got it made. But that's just not good enough for him, right? It's not good enough. Why? Why does this young man so desperately want out? We're not told exactly why, but probably, perhaps at least, some of the same reasons why children so desperately want out of their parents' houses today. Maybe they can't. Maybe he couldn't do the things that he wanted to do in Dad's house. My house, my rules. Sometimes we say to our children. Sometimes I would say to my parents, I'm going to do this, that, or the other. They say, oh, really? Where do you live? What kind of dumb question is that? I live right here. Then you ain't doing that. I've told y'all before about the time when my dad, I believe it was my dad, it might have been mom and dad, but I was going to do something, and I told him, I said, listen, it was after I had graduated high school, but I'm still living at home. I said, listen, I am 18. I'm a man. And I thought it was. And this is what I'm going to do. You can't tell me no. Where am I sleeping? I'm sleeping right here. He said, not if you do that. Because what I was talking about, of course, he'd make that clear that anything. But what I was talking about doing involved missing a service of the local church. And he said we were going to do this. I said, no, I'm going to do something with my friends. He said, you're not sleeping here tonight if you do. You're right. You're 18, son. And you got every right to make those decisions. But you don't have the right to do it under my roof. Be living here. So this young man, he's got it made, but he wants out. I don't know exactly why. Perhaps the same reason why folks sometimes want out of their parents' houses today. And it's interesting, in this parable, we don't have time to look at both sons, but both of these sons have attitude problems. But the younger son's problem is rebellion. Now, the older son, he's got other stuff going on, and we've studied that before, and we'll study that again at some other point, but this young man, this prodigal son, this younger one, he was selfish. This is his problem. So he says to his dad, give me the portion of goods that falleth to me. You know what he says? I wish you were dead. But since you're not, can I just go ahead and get what would be mine if you were? Now, I know I've studied this before, and I've heard other preachers point it out, and I've researched it, and it is true that sometimes in that culture, a son could ask for the inheritance before time. But I think the case still holds that when does an inheritance typically go to a child? It's when his dad is dead. So to me, it still comes across as him basically saying, I wish you were dead, but since you're not, can I go ahead and get what would be mine if you were? Now, how do you think that feels to his father? But regardless, he asked for his inheritance. He wants that. And so he says, give me. And buddy, if ever 2 words described rebellion, selfishness, they would be, give me. He doesn't say, Father, use me in some way to help the family, to help out with the chores, to help out with the responsibilities. He doesn't say, Father, take me and make me a servant. Doesn't say mold me into what you would have me to be. He says, give me. I want, you can just hear it, I want what's mine. So he's rebelling and selfish. And I'll tell you something else. When somebody decides to go off into the far country, you don't care who you hurt. You just don't care who you hurt. Because it is a selfishness problem. This young man could not have cared less about who he hurt. He couldn't have cared less about his parents. Do you think they would end up lying awake at night wondering, where is he? Is he safe? Is he okay? Losing sleep, no doubt, literally would be losing sleep. He didn't care. Man, I want what's mine. I got stuff to do. I want to go out and have fun. I want to live my life. He could have cared less about the responsibilities that he dumped on the rest of the family. He had responsibilities in that household. Now somebody's got to take up the slack. I'm sure a lot of it fell to the older brother, and perhaps that's why you see some of the resentment and bitterness later on. Doesn't make it okay, but he doesn't care. And that's my point. When a person has a mindset of rebellion, they're selfish, and they just aren't thinking about anybody else but self. And before we move on from this, I think it's important to notice that the father, though he was hurt, no doubt he would have been stung by this request. He didn't refuse. He didn't try to stop the boy. Sometimes when I was younger especially, I would read that and I would think, why doesn't he just say, son, no? No, I'm not giving you your inheritance. That's what I would do. Of course, again, I understood it a little better when I had children of my own. But again, you see a picture here in this Father of God, and I think it comes down to, same with God, He gives us a choice. And so he says to the young man, you can almost hear him saying perhaps, if that's what you really want, if you're sure that's what you really want, oh yeah, I want it. I'm positive, Dad. Just give me the inheritance. Don't give me one of your lectures. Just give me the inheritance. Okay. And likewise, God's not going to force anybody to serve him. What does Joshua say? Joshua 24:15. Choose you this day whom you will serve. And of course, he goes on to say, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. But you got to make a choice, folks. God's not going to just hog tie you and say, this is what you're going to do. He gives us a choice. And it's one of the sad truths is that it seems in every generation there's not just one, there are a multitude of people. I'm talking people that were brought up being taught biblical truths, sometimes being brought up with parents who are New Testament Christians. They know about what the far country really is. They understand what sin is, what its consequences are, what its end result is. But they say, I'm going to be different. I'm going to be the exception. And they end up in the pig pen every single time. And it's so tragic. And that's this young man. An attitude, a picture of rebellion. But second, you see a picture of revelry. You move on into verse 13. And not many days after, the younger son gathered all together and took his journey into a far country, and there wasted his substance with riotous living. You see, now he's got what he thinks he wants. I don't think there's any question this young man is, we might use the expression, he is living it up. Man, he sees the bright lights. He's getting excited. He's got independence. I mean, and listen, probably he wants it. He sees it. He wants it. He gets it. Because new money, right? It's an expression I used to hear sometimes growing up. New money. Somebody that fell into a large sum of money, just going to misuse it, mishandle it because they're not used to having it. That's this fella. I mean, he's just blowing it. And listen, he's got a lot of friends, and I should have intended to put that word in quotes because obviously they're not true friends. He's got a lot of folks with him, right? He is on the broad path that Jesus describes in Matthew 7, 13 and 14. Enter ye in at the straight gate, for wide is the gate. Broad is the way that leads to destruction. Many there be which go in thereat, because straight is the gate, straitened. Narrow is the way that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. When you're on the broad path, it's heavily populated. And he's got money. You're always going to have friends, again, using the quotes. You're always going to have so-called friends when you got money. And so he's on his way to the far country. So not only has he told his father, hey, can you give me what would be mine if you were dead? He gets it, and then he just out the door. Now again, you just put yourself in the parent's shoes. Imagine how that's got to hurt. But here he is. He's got all these companions with him. He's on that broad path. And everybody does what they want on that path. He's living it up. No absolute right, no absolute wrong when you're on the broad path. Partaking of everything. I mean, he's got the money. But what you see here is a young man. You see this several times in this parable. A young man who's lost his senses. He's lost his direction. And so the text says, if you're looking at the King James at least, he wasted his substance in riotous living. Now, I love how Brother Wayne Jackson points this out from time to time in some of his articles and writings, that sometimes what the Bible doesn't say is as much evidence for its inspiration as what it does say. Because there are times when you're like, you just says something in just a few words. And so much more could be said. And sometimes it leaves us with all kinds of questions. And you're like, but what else happened there? In fact, this parable is one of them. When you get to the end of this parable, the older brother, what did he do? His father goes out to him and reasons with him. What did he do? Did he go in and forgive his brother and change his attitude? Or did he stay that way and keep pouting? And I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us. And sometimes the silence of the Scriptures is as much an evidence for inspiration as what the Scripture says. But the Bible says he wasted his substance in riotous living. And to me, that's one of those, because it's a pretty succinct statement, but wow. He just... I heard an expression, and I still use it a lot, but I don't know if it's one of those Southern expressions or if it's just a more general expression, but it's probably familiar to most, if not everybody here. But we might say, in our terms today, this young man just blew it all. You ever been in a situation like that? When I was a kid, sometimes Grandmother Dollahite would come to our house, typically about this time of year on spring break. And she would come, and it was a very exciting and depressing time all at once, because we always loved to see Grandmother, and it was the only time of the year you could get Grandmother to come to our house. And we always went there typically. She lived about 45 minutes away. But she would actually come to our house for that week. It was a depressing time because she would work you to death. It was spring break, and we're going to get in the yard, and we're going to gather brush, and it was unbelievable. And 80 years old, 70, 80 years old, she could work circles around all of us. And so a lot of times, though, when you helped her out, she would, just out of generosity, give you $1 or $2. And we'd almost inevitably end up somewhere toward the end of the week. Maybe she's giving you $2 or $3 by the end of the week for helping her out. We'd go down to the little general store close to where we live, just out in the country. And I'm telling you, this is kind of basically like a feed and seed type store. They had a candy selection that was, it was impressive. I don't know if the guy that owned the place, that started the place, whatever, had children that just loved candy or what, but I've never seen the likes of it in just a generic, feed and seed type place or whatever. We'd go down there, though, and that money's burning a hole in my pocket. And I would go, and it might be Sweet Tarts, it might be, Skittles or whatever. By the time I left that store, I was like prodigal son. I blew it all. I don't have a dime to my name. And probably not long after I got home, I blew it all in the sense I didn't have a piece of candy to my name. That's this young man. He blew it all. And I'm sure he was having fun right now. You see, that's Satan's bait. Hebrews 11, 24 through 26 talks about Moses. He chose to stay with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. You see, that's Satan's bait. That's how he gets us hooked. Oh, it's going to be fun. And buddy, when you take that bait, he sets the hook. You don't have to be a pro angler to know what setting the hook means. That means you're done. You're caught. The good news is that God tells us you can let go of that hook. Satan's hook was a relative of mine on my mom's side that invented those years ago, what they called true turn hooks. And when you set that hook, it would turn or something, and it would make it a lot harder. Of course, they have a barb on them and stuff, and make it where it's very difficult for that fish to get loose. Now, sometimes they still do. But God says, when Satan sets the hook, if it remains there, it's just because you choose. You're just leaving it. Spit the hook out. Don't be reeled in. But this young man, he's having fun for now. That's Satan's bait to get you. So you got rebellion, you got revelry, but next, there's a third picture here, and you see it in verses 14 through 16. A picture of remorse. Oh, listen to what it says. And when he had spent all, what did we say? He blew it all. When he had blown it all, we might say, there arose a mighty famine in that land, and he began to be in want. And he went and joined himself to a citizen of that country, and he sent him into his fields to feed swine, and he would fain have filled his belly with the husk that the swine did eat, and no man gave unto him. Sometimes we say, he's in the pig pen eating the pig's food. He wasn't eating the pig's food. He got so hungry he would love to have eaten the pig's food, but he wasn't allowed to. Apparently he wasn't allowed to, and nobody would give him even so much as that. No man gave unto him. Well, the money ran out, right? Oh, he's got all those companions. He's living it up. He wants it, he gets it. But money doesn't just grow on trees. Boy, if I had a nickel for every time I heard that when I was a kid. And it eventually runs out. We might say in more modern terms, the rent became due. And then here comes the landlord. You're 2 months behind. You're 3 months behind, son. I don't want to do this, but I'm going to have to evict you if you don't get me something soon. The young man's going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't have anything. Well, son, you're going to have to move out. So maybe he gets evicted. Oh, maybe when he had all those companions, he went and got him a snazzy car. And maybe he's watching out the window as the repo man comes and loads that thing up, and off they go with it. Things are different now. He finds himself once surrounded by friends. Now he is totally, utterly alone. And make no mistake, this young man is going to be filled with remorse because this wasn't supposed to happen. This is not supposed to happen in the far country. The lights, the commercials, come to the far country. What happens in the far country stays in the far country. It's not supposed to be that way. This is not as advertised. I imagine he might have been thinking that to himself. The friends are gone now. He's all by himself. And I tell you what, folks, if that ain't a picture of hell, I don't know what is. Hate. He hates himself. He hates his life now. He hates his decision, no doubt, to leave. Solitude, destitution, misery. What a picture of hell. But he's not there yet because he can still leave. The far country doesn't care about him now. This is where his trouble began, right? You know the expression, you're probably familiar with it. Sin will take you farther than you ever wanted to go. It'll keep you longer than you ever wanted to stay. And it'll cost you more than you ever wanted to pay. I wonder how far away, physically speaking, that far country was. I wonder sometimes, might not have been that far away. Hey, listen, sometimes you don't have to go far at all to go to the far country. Sometimes the far country is right at home. Ask the older son. But it may not have been that far away, geographically speaking. But I wonder if he finds himself in this far country thinking, I feel 1,000,000 miles away from home. Sin will take you further than you ever wanted to go. I wonder how much time had passed in this story. Again, the Bible doesn't tell us. It's one of those curiosities that we have. I'd love to know. But it doesn't tell us. I wonder how much time passed. I suspect it wasn't terribly long. But I wonder if that young man is sitting in his misery and thinking, how long has it been? Has it really only been this long? It feels like 1,000,000 years ago when I left home. Oh, and he looks and he's so broke. Here he is in the pig pen. Oh, to a Jewish boy, the abomination that would be. And he thinks, this has cost me more than I ever thought I would pay. You see, Satan's not satisfied until you are completely, utterly destroyed, until you have lost your soul. And he will do whatever he can to get you to that point. He will use whatever deceit, whatever bait to get you to that point. And Jesus all the while is saying, what is a man profited if he should gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Matthew 16:26. Again, you got a picture here of a person who has lost his senses. You ever hear somebody say, boy, you done lost your mind? This boy has lost his good sense. He had a good life and a promising future, and now he's in a pig pen. I just wonder, it's a parable, I know, but do you ever wonder, I've wondered before if sometimes maybe here he is, he's just sitting, kind of in the mud, in the hog's mess, and he's just like, what on earth has happened to me? I mean, do you ever wonder if he just, listen, I grew up down the road, my Uncle Ted raised hogs. Now, if he heard me say that, he'd be upset. He raised hogs. But they don't smell great. He used to joke and say it smells like money to me. But they don't smell good. And so I just wonder sometimes if this young man is sitting there and he's like, what has happened? And he just kind of looks around like, what was my life like at home? How many servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare? And I'm sitting here starving. What has happened? A good life and a promising future, and now he's in a pig pen. Wasn't supposed to be this way. And now here's a young man that is full of remorse. But thank God this story doesn't end there, because we see a picture of return. Oh, look at the beginning there at verse 17. When he came to himself, he said, how many servants, hired servants of my father's have bread enough and to spare, and I perish with hunger. What did he say? Maybe I don't belong here. I was meant for so much better than this. And here I am in this pig pen. And so he begins to think of a speech. Maybe something, anything, maybe something that'll get his father even to let him in at the back door, as we say. So he says, I will arise and go to my father and will say unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before thee, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. Make me as one of thy hired servants. Wait, what? What did he say? Note his change in language here. Before it was, hey, give me what's mine. Now he says, make me. First he says, I'm going to tell my father, I've sinned. Make me as one of your hired servants. Have thine own way, Lord. Have thine own way. Thou art the potter, I am the clay. What's the next line say? Mold me and make me after thy will, while I am waiting, yielded and still. You see the change in the language here? Here's a young man that is broken, surrendered. He's penitent. See, you can't come home till you realize you've left home. You can't rescue somebody who's drowning if they're sitting there saying, you throw a life preserver out and they're saying, hey, I'm good. No, you're not good. Look at these waves. You're drowning. Don't need it. You don't understand. I know how to swim. Can't rescue a person like that. A person in the far country can't go home until he realizes, I've left home. If you make the far country home, you got problems. You see, this young man's attitude has changed now. And so he decides, I'm going to go back to my father, and I am going to beg to be let back in the house, even as a servant. But don't miss verse 20. 3 words. And he arose. Listen. Again, picture this young man. He's sitting in the far country. He looks around and he says, oh, this is miserable. It stinks. I am so hungry. Back home, even the hired servants had bread enough and to spare. This is terrible. I should just go home and beg my dad to take me back, even as a hired servant. But he sits. And he sits. I don't know. I was looking for Scott. I don't know where Scott is, but Scott talked about this on one of our mission trips. Deciding to do something. That's one thing. You can decide all day long, though. I've told y'all before about Leroy's joke about, I've been thinking about running today, thinking about going for a run. Yeah, we could think about something. We can decide something. This young man arose, and he went. And if you're in the far country, don't just sit there in the muck and the mire. Don't just decide Man, I talk to so many Christians that are away from God. They've gone astray, and they say, yeah, I really need to get things straightened out. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that sentiment and that acknowledgement, because, again, you can't help somebody that's just in denial. I've talked to people that need to obey the gospel, same thing. But until you arise and go home, you're still in the far country. And God help us. You know what sometimes parents and friends and loved ones do? We go right to the far country with them. What are we doing? Sometimes we try to keep one foot over here in the Father's house, and we got one foot over here in the far country so we can, keep talking to them. And what we end up doing, if we're not careful, if not outright, we enable them. And we encourage them to remain in the far country. Whether we intend to or not, that's what we do. This father no doubt missed his son. I dare say every single day he looked. Maybe they're finishing up the work, the servants are going home, and they're getting ready to close things out for the day. I bet you there wasn't a day that goes by he doesn't look down that road. And don't you know, there probably were days when he saw somebody coming, and maybe he just thrilled. And then he realizes as they get a little bit closer, that's not them. It's not my boy. Maybe it's somebody delivering something. Maybe it's somebody else coming for a visit. But you know what? He remained at home because that was home. He didn't go to him in the far country. He understood the young man's got to get up and leave the far country. Finally, he leaves the pig pen. He leaves the far country. Now he says, I'm going home. He arose, came to his father. When he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, he's rehearsed his speech, don't you know? Father, I've sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, didn't even listen to the rest of his speech. He says, bring forth the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and be merry. He leaves the pig pen to come home. He had to leave because he knows that at home there's a father that loves him. Deep down he knew that. This was the only place he was going to be truly happy. And I love this. You see the father who not only has compassion on his son, he ran to him. How do you see God? Most of the time we picture God, he's sitting on his throne, and he's there as we bring our petitions to him. That's fine. I mean, that certainly is a biblical picture of God. But don't miss it, folks. Here's a picture of God. He gets up and he's running to meet his child coming home. And you wonder if God really forgives? This is a picture of God. Here, God is pictured running to welcome that wayward child home. Young man, I heard about a young man several years ago that he was much like a real-life prodigal son. He had some money. He had come into some money. He took off. Oh, I'm grown. I'm going to move out. And so he did. He moved out and he went to some big city. Didn't keep in touch with his family. Father and mother worried about him all the time. Oh, especially the mom. And it weighed so much on the dad seeing his wife in such distress. Not that he didn't miss his boy, but boy, it was the boy's mama, it was killing her. So he decided he goes into that city. He says, goes to a social worker's office. He says, last I know, my boy, he came to this city. I can't even promise you he's still here. I don't know what else to do. I'm just trying to find my kid. I want to know, is he still alive? Is he safe? Social worker said, look, I'm just going to be up front with you. You're probably not going to find him. You're probably not going to hear from him. But this is, 4 days of social media and cell phones and all that. But he said, about the only thing I can tell you, here's probably your best shot, and it's a long shot. Get a picture, run some copies of it, and we'll just put your picture up with a little brief message. We'll put it in every bar, gambling joint, house of ill repute in this city. And then you just got to go home and wait and just hope for the best. He did. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited. But what he didn't know was one night, the boy stumbled in with some buddies. He'd been out. They'd been doing some drinking. Now they come to this bar. They're going to drink some more. He stumbled in, and he's laughing, and he just happens to turn his head over toward the wall, and about like he'd been shot. He just sat upright. He saw his picture of his dad. And he did a double take, and he looked at it again, and he saw just below it the message, "Son, I love you. Come home." For the person today who has wandered far from home spiritually, the message of the cross rings. I love you. Come home. Will you come as we stand and sing to encourage you?